Hey Chris, welcome to the Agree or Die podcast.
Thank you.
For all my listeners here, this is my old friend Chris Pitts, first time on the podcast. People have said to me, they say to me on the comments, they say, Alex, you got great guests, you're a great, beautiful person, but we just wish you'd have more conservatives on your podcast. And I say to them, I am the conservative on the podcast. Are you nuts? But I'm nothing compared to Chris Pitts. So now, Chris, not only are you very conservative politically, right? You are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. You are also very religious. Forever you have been. Since we've been in high school. Since high school. Since I've known him, yeah. So I brought him in here to talk about some complex topics, to get his conservative opinion on some things. So yeah, that's welcome over here.
Thanks.
You listen to some shows? You like them?
I have. There's a couple of them.
Was I too liberal on them?
No, I think what I appreciate about you is that you're always logical and rational. Right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're consistent, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later with veganism and abortion, right?
That's right. We're going to talk about abortion today. So buckle up. If you're driving, make sure to buckle up. We're getting deep. We're going deep. Actually, we've talked about abortion many times. But
you haven't talked about the videos that have come out.
I don't even know the videos are.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that a little bit.
We're going to talk about that. So me and Chris have spoken a little bit. What happened was, here's how this whole the synthesis of this whole meeting. I was on Facebook pushing the vegan agenda, and then somebody told me that God put animals on this earth for us to eat. And who am I to argue with the word of God if it's okay with God? And I say, as a matter of fact, it's interesting you brought God up, because the Garden of Eden didn't have any animals on it. They ate fruits and shit there, and that was like perfection, right? Mm-hmm. That's perfect humanity, the Garden of Eden. And they only had plants there. And then, as if, I don't know how you even saw that. I was like, I've been fighting on Facebook hundreds of battles. Chris shows up there, and he's like, interesting you brought that up. And then he starts talking about how the Bible, whatever. Like in this weird comment thread, one time ever. Like, how did you do that?
It was pretty random, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I don't know. For some reason,
random.
I can't remember. So someone actually brought up the Bible in the...
Yeah, some guy said, God put animals on this earth for us to eat.
So it felt like, that's right. I think I stepped in and I said, well, since it's already been brought up, since the religious card has been played.
Right. You were summoned.
Right.
You were as if you got a text alert.
I got
Someone's having a religious argument on Facebook. You show up to fix it. So from that, we started talking about it, because I don't know much about the Bible. I'm pretty clueless. I mean, not clueless, but I've never read it. I know the Garden of Eden was a garden. That's about as far as it went, But you know a lot more about it. And you came in and you're like, actually, that's a little bit true. The Garden of Eden didn't have any meat, and that was a perfect utopia for man, and there was no slaughter involved. So let's talk about it again. We've had the conversation, we're going to rehash it here. Tell me how we got to the point where God said it's okay to eat animals.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking this week about, whenever we turn to the Bible, we turn to Scripture for answers on specific topics. It made me think of a time, maybe in middle school, when I did that. I can't remember the topic. I think I was debating with someone in middle school on something. And I remember I went home and I looked in the back of my Bible, because there's a list of words that you could find. And I specifically looked for this word. I don't remember what it was. And it wasn't there, and I was frustrated, right? Because I was expecting the Bible to say, thou shalt do, thou shalt not, whatever. And I think since then I've learned that the Bible really it's not this rule book, right? It's a narrative. And I think it's important to realize that within that narrative, that there is the creation, there's the fall, there's redemption.
What are these things you're saying? Chapters?
No, there's 66 books in the Bible, at least the Christian Bible. What I'm saying is, if you think of the Bible as this story, it's almost like there's these main scenes. One, again, is the creation. We'll talk about that in a second. Then there's the fall, and we'll have to talk about that as well. Redemption, and then really the reconciliation, or the consummation of all things, eternity, the end times.
Okay.
My point is that it's within that narrative that we find ourselves, we learn about God, we learn about how we relate to Him, how we relate to one another. And so when you think about the creation, so here is God. He's existed since eternity past. Nothing created Him. He had no need for people. He just, out of His goodness, out of His creativity, out of His love, He created humanity. So He creates Adam and Eve, and He puts them in the garden. And what we find in the beginning of Genesis is this story of how He creates humanity, and He creates all things good. People, animals, fish, birds, whatever. But in the garden, He actually commands man to have dominion over the earth, to have authority over animals. But specifically around food, He gives to them the fruits, the vegetables, everything but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so he permits everything to be eaten except the fruit of this specific tree.
Okay.
So man eats it.
But they didn't eat animals, though.
They did not eat animals. No, God. And so the reason I think that they didn't eat animals, I think it's pretty clear. There was no death in the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
There was no death prior to the fall, right? Which is sort of the next scene in this meta-narrative.
Okay.
Right? So you have to understand that when God created the world, the universe, man, everything, he created it good. There was no sin, there was no death, there was no decay, there was no corruption.
There was a line that I liked where God said, everything that is green is yours to eat. Specifically, green.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a line. God
Absolutely.
said that.
Yep.
Yeah.
In Genesis 2. So he commands them to eat all that's green, the vegetables, the fruits, but again, he forbids them to eat of the tree.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what we got into a little bit online, is to say, okay, well, if that's what it was in the Garden of Eden, what changed?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why did it change? And it's really when Adam and Eve, man and woman, when they essentially rebel against God. I mean, God has... The Bible, it tells a story about a God who loves people. He loves his creation. He wants what's best for them. And that was true in the Garden of Eden. But man rebels against God. We sin. The Bible says we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And it's at that point in which they eat that death enters the world. So God said, don't eat of the tree. If you do, you will die. Do they physically die right at the moment? No, they don't. He's referring to a spiritual death and a physical death.
Okay.
And so it's that point in which decay, corruption, death enters the world. But everything prior to that was, like you said, was utopia.
Right.
It was perfect. But there was no eating of animals because there was no death.
And there was no need.
There was no need, sure. God created everything that they needed to be sustained apart from meat.
See, I think that's interesting.
Well, I think it's a beautiful picture.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I sort of jumped in there to say, yeah, that was true. And some of the things that you, and really, I think all of us agree that the world is not what it should be, right?
Sure, yeah.
I mean,
we all got changes to make.
I'm not saying there's no one out there who isn't saying that, life's generally good, but
Yeah.
many people, when they look at the events of the world,
Well, no one likes people dying of starvation.
no, people dying,
No one likes
environmental concerns,
stupid wars.
Absolutely. So when I jumped in, I was to say, yeah, that's right of the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
Sin enters the world, rebellion against God, and death and decay and corruption and everything associated with that. And then I think we talked a little bit about the fact that really it's not clear that man even ate animals until after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a story of God bringing a flood, the ark, right? It wasn't until the flood, until after the flood, that it's in Genesis 9, that God then permits man to eat meat. And we talked a little bit about why that might be. And there's different theories on it. I think one possibility is that if you think of the flood destroying everything on the earth, there's nothing else to eat.
Destroy the plants.
Yeah, absolutely.
They got to regrow.
The whole earth, essentially, it was entirely flooded. Everything died.
Sure.
Humanity, animals that weren't on the ark, vegetables. So they got to eat. The other thing the Bible says in that chapter, Genesis 9, is that man and animals will now be at odds with one another.
Huh.
And again, all of this is in contrast to what what Adam and Eve had, right, in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
I think one other thing that's kind of interesting is, as I was looking through back to that chapter, when God says that you can eat of the meat, eat of the animals, he says, but you can't do it with their lifeblood in them. So what does that mean? Typically in the Old Testament, when you think of when blood is called out and it's described, it's the life is in the blood. When you think of the life of a person, the life of the animal, it's referred to as the blood. And so what I think it's saying is that God is saying, I'm allowing you to eat the animals. You have to out of necessity. There will be a predator-prey relationship now, both in the animal kingdom and between animals and humanity. But there's a way that's right to do it. Humans won't attack animals and eat them alive like you would see in the animal kingdom.
Okay.
I think the idea that God is saying there is he's saying there's a humane way in which you're to treat animals, even though you're going to eat them. I'm not saying you're not, you will.
Okay.
But he says you won't eat them with their lifeblood. I think it's saying in a way that's inhumane, in a way in which they're still alive. Like you would see in the animal kingdom, right?
Interesting.
I mean, animals are not taking the time to make sure the animal is dead before they start to eat it, right?
Yeah, okay.
But God is saying there's a difference. You're to be different. And so ever since then, we've eaten animals. and that is the biblical account.
So here's a couple of things I got out of the story. Well, first off, if you're a religious type person, I mean, I'm not religious, so this to me, I mean, it's interesting as a mythology, but it doesn't affect my choices in any way. But I have heard people come at me that are religious that are like, well, God said I could eat animals, so everything you're saying is stupid because I believe in God. Well, for those types of people, Adam and Eve were intended to survive if they didn't, break the rules. They were intended to survive their entire eternity eating only fruits and vegetables. So if you're a religious person, you're saying, well, I need to eat meat to be healthy. You don't. God built your body in a way that you do not need to eat meat to be healthy. So there's that.
That's the first statement.
Second off, when the flood, if the flood comes, destroys all the crops, out of necessity you have to eat meat. Okay, well, the necessity is definitely gone now. So why would you not endeavor to get yourself closer to God's intended plan at this point? You know what I mean? Like, you right now can definitely afford to live like Adam and Eve lived. And that would be more in God's word, right? I mean, he said, okay, out of necessity you can eat animals, but there's no necessity anymore.
Well, I want to be careful and not say more than what the Bible says. If you're asking me, why did he permit the eating of animals? It seems like that. I'm not saying they didn't eat animals before that, but it seems pretty clear. It is absolutely clear that God permits it. Was it out of necessity?
Maybe.
Perhaps.
Or some reason.
Whatever reason. But I think you're right to say that. I will say...
You should strive for the utopian design, right? If you believe in God's plan, you should strive to go to his utopian design.
I think that's...
No?
I think it's legitimate to say that there was a time in which we didn't eat animals.
Yeah.
And we'll also talk a little about the consummation, the end times, eternity, and what that looks like a little bit.
Okay.
But as I have read through the scriptures, it's interesting that in the it's kind of interesting, of the things that the Bible talks about, food is actually one of the things it talks about quite often. And in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians, I believe chapters 8 through 10, and definitely Romans 14, which is two different books of the Bible, the same author, Paul, he actually talks about specifically eating meat.
Okay.
But I want to be careful because the context is critical. So here's a group of believers, Christians, who have grown up in society in a Greco-Roman culture, right, which has many gods, temples, and in those temples they sacrificed animals and they took that meat and they sold it in the market. So there was a dispute that rose up among the believers who said, is it recognizing pagan worship, is it recognizing these gods, is it sinful to eat meat that was sacrificed to these gods? So the author steps in and basically makes an argument of one of conscience. He says, for the person who believes it's not sin, because there's a group of people who said, look, I believe in Yahweh, the one true God. I don't believe in these pagan gods. They don't exist. So sacrificing meat to something that doesn't exist, what does it matter?
Right, okay.
And Paul said, for you, don't eat in the temple, because you don't want to, don't eat in the temples.
Eat in the temple.
Right, don't eat the meat in the temples. Don't identify with that worship, basically.
Don't eat the meat from the temples.
Right, in the temples. Physically in the temple.
In the temple.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Why would they do that anyway?
Well, that's a good point.
Okay.
But he said, in the marketplace, if it's not in conflict with your conscience, you're free to eat of the meat.
Okay.
But then he says, to those who say it's objectionable to my conscience, don't eat the meat. And then in Romans 14, he basically says, in the beginning of the chapter, he says, don't judge one another. So within Christianity, there are certain topics that are sort of peripheral, you might say. And I would say, if I'm giving an accurate account of what the Bible says, that seems to be one of those issues. Now, again, the context, I want to be really clear on this, is meat sacrificed to gods.
To not your God.
Correct, pagan gods.
Right.
But Paul, the author of these two letters.
Who's Paul? What gives him authority?
So Paul is an apostle.
That makes him a good word? You could trust him?
Yeah, he's a prolific writer in the New Testament. So the story of Paul is pretty amazing. You have to go to the book of Acts to hear his story. So Paul was a Jew of all Jews, raised in a strict tradition, knew the Torah, the Old Testament, really, really well. And he was also someone who persecuted the Christians. He actually had authority from the Jewish leaders at that time to go around and kill the men, Christian men, and to round up Christian women and children. And the story goes in Acts that as he was going along his way, Jesus revealed himself in a vision to Paul. And he actually blinded Paul. Paul went into a town. And a Christian who was called by God to go and see Paul ministered over him, prayed over him, and Paul received his vision and believed in God and became a minister for God, for Christianity. So in the Christian church, he has an immense amount of authority based on his testimony, based on what he once was, and based on his writings.
Okay.
So anyways, I just want to be really clear that we've talked about the Garden of Eden. We talked about the flood, God's permission. We talked about the New Testament, and there is a lot of writing about the fact that some people had viewed meat as being against their conscience. Paul says, if it's not against your conscience, you're free to eat. If it's against your conscience, don't eat. But he also makes an argument that I think is really important. And he says, whatever you do, don't be a stumbling block to your brother or sister. And by that I mean someone who's a fellow Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if I come over to your house, well, let's talk about, we went to the Chinese restaurant, right? 2 weeks ago, whatever.
Okay.
I know your views on vegetarianism
Mm-hmm.
or veganism.
Veganism, yeah.
I don't have to eat meat. There's no need for me, and I didn't when we went out to eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I be offensive to you?
Yeah.
There's no need.
Yep.
And basically, Paul makes that same argument within the Christian church. There's other topics like that, but that one is very, very specific and very black and white, specifically around meat, sacrifice to these idols, and how Christians eat those meats. So again, I'm bringing it up because if you turn to Romans 14, you would see, he would say, for those who eat vegetables, and for those who eat meat. Whatever you do, don't offend one another.
Mm-hmm.
You have this freedom. But I also want to be clear that there's a context. I just want to take the text out of its context.
Right, yeah. And this is something I wanted to get into somewhere, I don't know where, but I really appreciate that time we went out, you did not get chicken chow mein. I mean, it's true, I never really thought about it, but when I go out to eat with my friends, I get vegan food because that's me, and they get whatever they always order. They never consider it at all. And you're the only person who actually took that into account and said, you know what, this time I'm not going to get anything meat. You got some kind of a tofu dish or whatever. They were out of tofu, unfortunately, but I really appreciate that a lot. And I think everyone else out there who has vegan friends who they make fun of, whatever, vegans, whatever, when you go out to eat with them, consider ordering vegan food then, not only as out of respect, because it is very respectful and they will appreciate it, but because, that's a good opportunity for you to try it out and get a feeling for what it's like, not because I want you to walk in my shoes, but because you'll realize that if you order just vegetable fried rice, you're still going to have a nice dinner, you're still going to have a good time, and, you get to respect your friend a little bit and kind of live the life. I think that's a good lesson. I really appreciate you did that.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely rooted in what I just said. Now, of course, Paul is talking about two Christians, right? But I don't see why it couldn't apply outside of that context.
And it should.
What reason would there be to offend you? I don't have to eat meat. So yeah, certainly that was in my mind. Yeah, I mean, and that's something I've reflected on as we've talked, and I think about this biblical account. And ultimately, certainly we disagree, right? You're opposed to eating meat. I'm saying the biblical account is you have freedom. Mm-hmm. Eat vegetables if you want, eat meat, but don't offend one another.
Sure.
And I think that's really critical because we can often make flippant comments, right?
Sure.
About whether, well, certainly usually unidirectional meat eater towards someone who doesn't eat right. Why are they vegetarian? They have some kind of concept about, treatment of animals. And I think, at least from my research in the scriptures, it's totally inappropriate. To treat that lightly, to treat it that flippantly. That's against your conscience. And I respect that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That's really nice. And I think this is a great perspective that, it gives me a little more knowledge on religious people. Because I've heard this several times where how can I argue with a person that says God said I have permission? I mean, I can't. If they believe in God, they're not going to listen to me. They don't give a shit.
Well, yeah, and I've thought about that a little bit over the week since our conversation. I think, well, maybe just to take one step back before we kind of move to maybe some of the implications. So we talked about the fall. We talked about creation, the fall. What we didn't really talk about was redemption in end times. And I think one of the verses I had mentioned to you was there's one in Isaiah 11, and there's one in, I think it's Isaiah 65. Both pretty much the same thing, and they're talking about the new heaven, the new earth. They're talking about eternity. They're talking about the end times. And on this new heaven, on this new earth, where Christ reigns, where there's no death, there's no decay, no corruption, I think it's pretty clear that, again, we won't eat meat. So it's kind of interesting when you think about the biblical, again, this narrative, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of bookends.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be missed on us, especially Christians.
Yeah.
That at the very beginning was paradise, the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
And then sin into the world, and ever since then we haven't been the same. And again, that is the meta-narrative, that is the story. I mean, it's primarily a story of a person, Jesus Christ, right? I mean, Christians believe that in and of ourselves, we cannot be reconciled with God. And so it's this amazing story that God himself would take on human form and take the punishment that was due us.
Jesus Christ.
Right. And so people who place their faith in Christ, who are forgiven, they're reconciled with him, will live on this new earth and this new heaven. And essentially, it resembles, it seems to me from what I've read, to resemble the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Because again, there's no death.
Yep.
And the text I mentioned to you describe, again, I think this beautiful image of the doing away of the predator-prey relationship. Mm-hmm. Versus the lion and the lamb will lay together. Mm-hmm. I think in Isaiah 11 it talks about a child leading, I can't remember which animal, but it certainly is a predator. And so in this new heaven, in this new earth, which I believe will be here, we'll have physical bodies. There's no death. There's no eating of animals again. So it's just interesting when you think of sort of this bookend.
Yeah, it is interesting. Where, we started from utopia and there's no meat eating, and then we'll end up at a place where there's no meat eating. And then in between, we're fucking up all the time.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
In my opinion.
Well, I think that's what we talked a little bit too, is, ultimately, it seems to me that generally I think people agree that this is not what we would hope for.
The world as it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What we disagree about is how we got here and how we got out of it, right?
Sure.
But yeah, no, I don't think anyone looks around, or I certainly actually would hope not, and say, hey, this is pretty good.
Yeah. And I think that, getting to it, becoming vegan is more than just changing your diet too. It makes you more compassionate and understanding in a lot of ways. And we will get to how it's changed my life. It seriously has. But let me ask you this. This is something that I came up with on my own. Is eating animals, could it be that us coming to the conclusion on our own as a race, as a species, to stop eating animals because it's wrong, could be a test from God? God is testing us by saying, you can eat meat now. But we have to figure out on our own that we should not be eating meat anyway, because it's unethical, it's immoral. Animals have feelings that we shouldn't trample on. We need to come to that conclusion on our own and truly learn compassion for the helpless. And once we all, as a race, or a species, I should say, I don't want to say race, we will learn that and stop eating animals. That is when we truly are ready to get back to work, get back to doing God's work and all that. Because it's unethical to do. And I've said it a lot of times in the podcast that I want to rehash all the stuff, but
sure.
It seems like it could be very well a test from God. So yeah, you can do it. Animals, they do feel pain, they do suffer. You can tell, but you can eat them if you want. But really, it's a test for us to learn compassion and not do that instead. Could that happen? Could that be a thing?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is it's clear to me that God does present tests. Right? Yeah, he presents. So people might say, well, if the Garden of Eden was so perfect, why did man rebel against God? Right. And I think the obvious answer is that God did not want to create biological robots. He wanted people who would actually love and serve and worship him out of their own free will. So he gave to humanity, free choice. But I think that's very different than if we see in, again, Genesis 9, when God gives to man animals. I guess my primary objection to that would be, I'm not saying God doesn't test people, I think he absolutely does. Yeah. My primary objection to that would be that would be contrary to his character. That is, to me, it would seem to create or suggest that he is deceiving.
What do you mean?
Well, so God tells us that you can go ahead and eat animals, but behind it was always this agenda that he would hope we would come to our own on this. I hear what you're saying. I think it's interesting, but my primary objection would be that as I think of the qualities of God, I guess I would sort of suggest that is deceptive.
Well,
so God gives me a black and white commandment. He says there's a predator-prey relationship now. You're free to eat meat, but behind it there's always something more. And I think that predator-prey...
But he gives you a lot of commandments that are contradictory. Like, for example, the commandment, thou shalt not kill, that's a commandment, right? You shouldn't kill. Mm-hmm. Now, you can interpret that in a lot of ways, but the another one is, what's thy neighbor? What's a thy neighbor commandment?
So Jesus says,
okay.
Jesus is approached in the New Testament by religious leaders, and they say, what is the greatest commandment in the Bible?
Okay.
And so Jesus says that the greatest commandment is that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. He says this is a great and first commandment.
All right.
But then he says there's a second commandment like it, and he says you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Love thy neighbor.
And he says on these two commandments hinge all the law. Basically, everything we see in the Old Testament, like the law we were talking about earlier, all of it hinges on those two ideas.
Treat
love
others.
God,
it's a golden rule.
Love others. Yeah.
So it's a love thy neighbor. That's what it is. So here's what I like. They specify, neighbor means fellow Christian, fellow man.
I would argue anyone.
Any person.
So that's the idea of the Samaritan?
Sure. So what I enjoy here is a difference where it's love thy neighbor, okay? And then it's thou shalt not kill. Now it's not thou shalt not kill thy neighbor, right? It's thou shalt not kill, period. That's the commandment. Thou shalt not kill. Every time you slaughter an animal, you obviously are killing, right? So I would say it's contradictory for God to say you can kill and eat animals, but thou shalt not kill is a commandment. That's a contradiction. Now, he gave you permission to eat animals. Say, okay, this is like a loophole. You can eat animals. But there's still a commandment, thou shalt not kill. So if you're a real hardball Christian, you should obey the commandment above all else. Unless you have to kill an animal, then you say, okay, God said I could, if I have to. But we don't have to. So I think as a test, this makes perfect sense in my mind. Where he said, thou shalt not kill. Do with that what you will. And then I'll give you this permission to kill animals, after the flood, whatever. But still, thou shalt not kill. So you kind of got to make a choice. And if you make the choice every day to eat a cheeseburger, then you're breaking that commandment every single time. I mean, it's not even deceptive. I don't think it's not deceptive. I would say what that means to me, as totally out of the loop, is out of necessity. If you kill an animal because you have to survive, God said that's okay, but you shouldn't be killing if you can avoid it. Last resort only situation, and God will take it as a case-by-case basis where, okay, you killed a cow because you were in a desert and you were dying and there's a cow, forgiven. But if you kill a cow because you prefer a cheeseburger to a fucking salad, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure how God will feel about that because, you're killing a cow, thou shalt not kill is a commandment.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is that, interestingly, in Genesis 9, where he permits man to eat meat, he also talks about thou shalt not murder.
Okay.
He repeats that commandment in the Ten Commandments. So to me, even we don't even have to go to the Ten Commandments. We can still stay in Genesis 9 and see that God gives two different commands, right? You can eat animals, but thou shalt not murder. I think murder is in the context of fellow person.
You think that?
I think it's pretty clear.
Is it clear?
I mean, I don't have the Hebrew here, but I think certainly God commands Israel to have a number of wars.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, war.
I think ultimately it comes down to a distinction between capital punishment or some sort of killing in that nature versus murder, right? In terms of you have what I want, I'm going to take it, even if it means I have to kill you.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, it ultimately comes down to how you define
you can. Word. I mean, you could talk a lot about killing, but I think the commandment is really clear. And unless you have a good reason to kill someone, where capital punishment would maybe be a good reason, a war would probably be a good reason. The taste of meat versus the taste of a vegetable, that's not a good enough reason. Survival certainly is a reason that you could argue, but just because the flavor's fine, I think that's not a good enough reason. I think that thou shalt not kill would apply over other things when the reason isn't good enough. When you have a clear choice and you're going to be fine either way, and you choose the route of killing, I think that you're going against God's will in that case. And I think God would probably agree with that.
So I disagree.
You disagree that God would agree?
I disagree that God would agree with you. Or I disagree that how you're defining killing, murder. But here's what I'll say. Because I knew we were going to talk about this, and I thought, well, at the end, I think the biblical account is pretty clear. But I think if you're interested in how do I make some progress with, and again, I'm speaking for Christians, right? If you're going to have any progress with anyone who identifies with Scripture, what can I appeal to?
Okay.
Now, I think a few weeks ago when we were talking about this, you talked a little about, am I saying it right? Militant veganism? Am I using the right word? Militant?
Abolitionist.
Abolitionist, thank you. Versus...
Welfarist.
Okay, and one is sort of abolish versus can we make conditions a little better?
Right. Abolitionists want to stop all animal exploitation, period. Welfarists want to take baby steps and improve animal care and, humane slaughter up to the point where eventually maybe we can get to the point where it's humane not to eat them at all. So they're a baby step, and the abolitionists are hardline, do it now. Every baby step is pointless.
Right. Abolitionists, and again, what was it?
Welfarists.
Welfare. So, again, as I've gone back through some of these texts and I thought about the implications for anyone who identifies with Scripture, I think what you can appeal to is the fact that God put man over creation, that God put man over the animals. And I think what I mean by that is even to the extent of how we treat them. I don't think it's very clear to me you can't make a biblical case that in the time being you have to refrain from meat. Again, I'm not saying that God says you have to eat meat. I'm just saying you can't say that God says you can't eat meat.
He suggests you can't.
Suggests you can't?
He suggests you shouldn't eat meat, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and again, I don't necessarily. I think there's the bookends. I think there's nothing wrong with trying, in some sense, to experience what we don't have yet. That is in eternity in heaven.
Yeah.
But what I would say is this: I think what you'll find more success with is appealing to Christians in terms of how they're caring for the world and for animals. Because what you can appeal to is, again, back to Genesis 1 and 2, and how God put man in authority over the earth, over animals. And so I would say that it is God honoring, it pleases him in terms of how we handle the world. So again, I'm not saying, I don't think you're going to get many to the abolitionist position, but in terms of welfare, and again, I think when you go back to Genesis 9, when he said you can't eat the animals with the lifeblood in them, there's different interpretations, but I think it's speaking to humane killing.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would have more success appealing to that.
Can't do it. I like my story better. All right, well, you know what? We'll take a little break. All right, so then let's go back to where I said being vegan is more than just a dietary change. It actually makes you look at the world a different way. And what I mean by that, and how it applies to me. Now, I have been I wouldn't say diehard pro-choice person, but I've been pro-choice my whole life, essentially. Oh my God, what happened? I inhaled something, sorry. Now, here, the difference between me and other pro-choice people, I think, and what makes me better than them, I'll say that, I'll come on and say it, is I'm very logical about it, okay? I realize that for us to say, as a humanity, life begins at a certain point is completely arbitrary. We have no fucking reason to decide that 3 months is the cutoff, or 6, whatever the fucking month. I don't give a shit what the monthly cutoff is. We have no right to say that. We don't know anything. We have all been a fetus, but we don't remember that point where now I'm aware. It doesn't matter anyway. The thing is, every fetus is a potential human being. So in a given amount of time, that will be a baby. So to say, well, at a certain point, it isn't a baby, we can murder it. I always realize that's an irrational belief. That is really dumb. My recourse at that point was simply, babies don't matter that much. I'm kind of a misanthrope, which means I don't like humanity. I hate humans. That is always kind of has been the case for me. I don't care about human life that much. I don't value it very highly. If a pre-baby dies, I simply don't care that much. And I'm fully aware of that and cognizant of that, and that's why abortion for me is fine. If you want to kill a baby, I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? The baby's probably not going to feel very much pain. It's not going to suffer. It's just not going to have life, and it won't mind. It won't ever have time to be upset by this idea, So that's why I was pro-choice. But what happened was when I became vegan, this is what happened, and my life really changed at this point. Let's just say you, not you, but you could say the same thing about a chicken. You could say, I don't give a shit about a chicken. What do I care if a chicken dies? A chicken has no value to me. I just don't care. But now that I can't say that anymore because I need to fight off that argument. People who eat beef because I don't give a fuck about cows. You care, I don't. You want to kill cows, kill cows. I got to the point now where it's unethical to kill cows. Whether you like cows or not, it's simply unethical to kill them. And then how can if I apply that to chickens, how can I not apply that to human children at this point? So it's actually changed me from being pro-choice to being pro-life. Because even my whole time, I never denied that a fetus was a baby. I never denied that. I would just say a baby doesn't matter. Well, now I can't even say that anymore because, well, it's unethical to kill babies. They deserve a chance at life like everybody else. It's unethical. Unless there's a really good reason. If you want to come up with, very, very narrow exceptions like, well, the mother's life is on the line. Okay, well, survival is on the line. We're a different discussion. If it's a matter of convenience, then you should not kill the baby. Now, convenience is a word that we use, but if by convenience I mean, well, I'm not ready to have a baby, that's convenience. If it's I can't afford to have a baby, that's convenience. I understand that it'd be very inconvenient for somebody who's not ready for a baby to have a baby. Very inconvenient. However, that's not a good enough reason to kill something. That's kind of where I got to, and only because of veganism. You like chicken because it's convenient for you. That's not a good enough reason to kill a chicken. Even if you don't care about chickens, that's not a good enough reason. So it's the compassion is added into my life, and I still want to be pro-choice because I still hate humans that much that I want less humans to be around. But I realize that it's not logical for me to have that stance when it comes to humans and not apply that to all the other animals. But I refuse to do that. So I have to change my view. I have to pull a 180 on abortion. It's only the only rational thing to do, and that's what it's done to me.
Yeah, I know. I'll say. I think when we first started talking about this, I'll say I was partly shocked. I think I had posted something on Facebook. I had inadvertently posted a pro-choice article, and apparently I don't know Facebook very well. I was intending to share my pastor's comment on the article, and you saw the article, right?
Yeah.
And I think you said, "What is this? Is this weird?
Is it weird that you're posting this?
Isn't this weird that you're posting it?"
Because it was a pro-choice article.
I'm like, it's very weird. And then we started having a dialogue over it, and I tried to explain it, and then I just took it down right.
Yeah.
And then you said, "What? You just take it down?" And I thought, "Oh boy, here we go." And then you told me about your shift in position, I'm
the only person I know that has changed their minds on this. I'm still like, I think if it came to a vote, like we are voting if your state's going to illegalize abortion or not, I would just abstain from voting rather than voting in any direction because I'm still like so weird about it. But I definitely wouldn't vote pro-choice at this point, And it has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with, anything. And a lot of pro-life stuff is religious based. But the point is, it's really kind of intentionally ignorant. It's a form of denial to say that a fetus isn't alive. It's a form of denial because it for sure is going to be alive. Like you're picking a certain amount of time where, it's not alive here. It's alive only here. But if you don't kill it here, it for sure will get there. So it's kind of like, it's irrational. It's like manifest destiny. You're going to end a life before you determine that it's a life, and then it will never be a crime. But, it's weird. It's a weird thing to do. Like, this is, here's what kind of this is. I have a book here called 60-Second Philosophy, and it's got a bunch of philosophies in it, like 1 page each. But one of them is, let's say there's a train, and it's going into a group of people. I don't know, they don't know the train is there, but it's going to crash into a city and blow the city up, okay? And then if you shift the lever to switch the train to a different fork, then the train will run over a single person. He's like in the tracks. And you have to push the lever. Now, if you push that lever, are you responsible for the murder of that person? You made a rational choice to kill that person by altering the course of an event. Are you responsible for that? Or is your, whatever, change it? And then, you can talk about that. Because if you decide that it's okay for you to change that, then let's go to a different scenario where, let's say same situation, but this time, you have to physically shove a person off a bridge into the train. And then if he hits the train and he'll die, the conductor will stop the train. So it's a much more personal effect on shoving a person down. And are you responsible for that? And the idea, the way this is related, I think, is that you're making a choice today, like right now, that you are justifying by saying it's a greater good. But in essence, you're still responsible for shoving a person off a bridge into a train. And that's kind of, it's maybe it's weird, maybe it's not, but that's what you're doing with a fetus. You're saying, well, the fetus, if the woman's not ready to have it, if she's not financially secure, or her husband's an abuser, or whatever it may be, you're going to spare the child that much agony by killing him now, and that makes it okay. And then we say, well, he's not a life yet, so it's totally okay. But you know what? That's not rational. Maybe he'll have a bad life. Maybe he will. But that's not really your choice to make. If you can ask the fetus if you want to die now or continue living, he'll say I want to continue living. So.
Yeah, look, I'll say first that I sympathize with those who find themselves in unplanned pregnancy situations.
It's bad.
Yeah, it's a bad situation depending on what circumstances. So I won't say who it is. It's someone pretty close. She actually posted on Facebook sort of her testimony, but she had an unplanned pregnancy with her boyfriend, and there was a time in which she was contemplating abortion, and so she actually went to Planned Parenthood to have that conversation. And I think what makes, maybe we'll get on this a little bit later about Planned Parenthood or any type of facility that does this.
Let's get into it now.
Well, I think ultimately they distort the truth. What you're saying is absolutely true, that life begins at conception, but when you go into these facilities, what they try to tell you is that it's a blob. It doesn't have any feelings. We can just make this go away, right? So again, I sympathize with those who find themselves in that situation. But there are better options. And I think you're right to say that ultimately at the root of most abortions, if not every abortion, except for the 10th percent of a percent, it is a matter of convenience.
It's a matter of convenience.
It's a matter of,
totally agree with that.
I would say ultimately pride. I want my lifestyle, my career. I've even heard people say, how will this change my body, right? And absolutely, pregnancy absolutely changes a female body. There's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. So it's a tragic situation, but there are options. And I ought to say one thing that has been so you have, maybe your audience knows, there's been, I think at this point now, there's been 9 videos released by a group called the Center for Medical Progress, and it's been an undercover.
Before you continue,
sure,
we had a great segue just now, so we got to have a little toast to it. Segue toast. We had a segue, so that was perfect.
But so this group has.
I have not seen these videos. Tell me about them.
Sure. So, basically, it's been an undercover investigation for maybe 2 or 3 years, where this nonprofit group, has been going and doing undercover investigations, conversations with people from Planned Parenthood, primarily people who profit or receive fetal tissue. So I think one of them is called Stem Express. There's been others, right? So
they take stem cells.
Yeah. So Planned Parenthood performs the abortion, and then they sell the tissue to these various groups. And what the videos have just shown, essentially, is the way in which Planned Parenthood will manipulate abortions to be able to maximize fetal tissue, the health of the tissue, which is illegal. There's been a lot of debate about
what's illegal.
Manipulating the abortion procedure in order to...
What does that mean, manipulate?
How you might actually manipulate the body in order to get a full specimen. It hasn't been entirely... No one's coming out in these videos. I'll be clear. No one's coming out in these videos and saying, yeah, we make sure that the baby's alive at the time of an abortion, right? And I'm not saying, no one's saying that.
What's illegal?
What is illegal? I don't know the exact law.
Okay.
But basically, there is within the law an acceptable way in which you perform an abortion. That way does not maximize good fetal tissue. So Planned Parenthood manipulates the way in which they conduct abortion. I can't remember the specifics.
Well, okay. So you're saying that there is a sanctioned way to perform an abortion.
Yes.
And doing it in a different way would be illegal.
Yes.
And they do it in an illegal way.
The videos seem to suggest that.
They suggest that.
Yes.
They show the abortion procedure?
No, but in these interviews, they will describe the way in which they actually manipulate the body.
Okay.
Within the womb. To be
the
able
fetus
to...
body.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. to be able to maximize the fetal tissue, the health of the tissue, the intactness of the tissue, the body itself.
Okay, well.
So there's a couple pieces in the videos. That's one.
Right.
The other one is selling fetal tissue for profit. And so there's been a big debate about whether it's actually profit or is just covering their costs. But basically, I think what it has shown is just the callousness towards human life. And I think it's more to your point, too, about life in general, right?
Okay.
And I think what's been disturbing about these videos is that callousness. And we can get into conversations around, was the baby alive or not? And there's one video that shows a baby, basically they touch the body and it causes the heart to beat again. So is the baby alive? I mean, obviously it can't sustain its own life, but it seems like perhaps it's possible. Other things in the video talk about, again, the way in which they make profit off these bodies. But all that aside, even, it's just the callousness. I mean, there's one video in which, I think what got me was, there's a video in which there's two people who apparently they're taking specimens or taking tissue to be able to take it and sell it, to provide it to these companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone looks over at one of the babies and says, "Hey, look, it's a boy." Like exclaiming, like in joy, as someone would when they see their child, that, hey, it's a boy, it's a girl. And it's just this callousness. And specifically,
that's a weird joke to make because you must see a boy all the time. He's gonna make the joke constantly to get a laugh 1/10 of the time. Like, what the fuck?
How often does this happen? They just happen to be filming.
Well, they have boys all the time, right? Because 50% are boys, probably. So he just says it's a girl or it's a boy, or 100% of the time he gets to say it's a girl or it's a boy. Whatever. That's not very funny as a comedian. From a comedian standpoint, that's not a funny joke for that guy to make. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. The thing is, though, these people truly believe that those aren't lives. Or they believe if they are lives, they don't matter.
Yeah.
And this is the same philosophy that people have when, it's a hamburger. And that's why I resonate with this. Because that's the same mentality that people who... It's in their mind. Like, you have a dog, like my dog, and that's not a hamburger. Not at all. In China, that is a hamburger. And we can see as Americans that a dog in China is a fucking hamburger, and that's totally fine there. And you can see the what's cognitive dissonance, of saying, well, cows are mindless, idiotic machines that do nothing but turn corn into beef, and that's all they do. But dogs are emotional, personality-filled beings that fill our lives with joy, and they have a full range of emotions. And we can have both those exist together in our fucking stupid brains, and that makes sense. That doesn't make any sense, because the cows are the same as the dogs. They have the same range of emotions. They like tennis balls the same fucking way dogs do. And we fucking murder them and don't give a fuck, And that's really a shame. And that's what's going on with this, exactly what's going on. These guys who are making these jokes, well, a fetus is not a baby. They would never do that to a baby. They're fine human beings. They're not evil people. They would never kill a baby and make a joke about it. But a fetus, in their mind, they're stuck there, is not. It's something that's a lifeless tissue mass that looks like a baby, but it's not there yet. I think that distinction is arbitrary and dumb. I've come to that now. I think that distinction is, and I always thought that. I don't want to say I come to that. I always knew that distinction was dumb. We don't know when life begins because we're fucking stupid humans. We're dumber than we think we are. And we just decided that, 3 months is the fucking cutoff. Ooh. So, yeah, I mean, I understand why they're callous. I get it. They can make jokes, and it's inappropriate for once you decide that the fetus is a life, that joke is totally inappropriate. But I want to say those people, are just not getting it. You know what I mean? They're not. So...
Well, yeah, I think you're right. That I guess I would say that at one point, I think people recognized it was life, and I think you're right that at some point, then through repetition of death or whatever it might be, there became this numbness or callousness, and we try to rationalize it, right? And so, like I said, with this individual I know who went to Planned Parenthood, to say, hey, look, it's just a blob, doesn't feel anything, whatever, we can take care of this.
They were trying to coerce her.
Well, and I think that's one reason why people are appalled at what they hear, either from testimonials of people who've gone or in some of these videos, is that they are pushing an agenda, right? They would claim neutrality. I would say there's an agenda there. Mm-hmm. To be even more, I think, black and white on this, my wife was telling me, she actually went to Planned Parenthood's website. You talk about options. There are options, right? There are crisis pregnancy centers which are more than willing to talk to you about either providing care, adoption options, anything but abortion. My wife actually helps support, we've supported a local crisis pregnancy center. Planned Parenthood on their website has a page describing why crisis pregnancies centers are illegitimate, why they're not healthcare centers, and why you should essentially avoid them. There is an agenda here.
I mean, for sure.
It's absolutely clear.
You're right. There is. There's profit to be made. They make money. Even as a non-profit organization, they still need to make money, for sure. And that it's important to know that. I think whatever choice you make, I think it's important to know that profit definitely drives every organization. Doctors aren't cheap; they need to be paid. And in the case of Planned Parenthood, they pay their doctors by selling stem cells, right? They need to pay their doctors to have it, and maybe the CEO was, sifting money off the top and being greedy. It might be, and that's something you should be exposed. But I mean, I don't see anything unless they're telling lies, which you can argue. You could say maybe they're lying.
Who's lying?
Planned Parenthood. If you want to make a case that they're lying, they're slandering, other foundations. That's bad. But I think for them to, if they really believe that a fetus is a lifeless mass, and they're trying to convey that to the mothers who are potentially making a decision, and they're trying to put them at ease, they're trying to comfort them by saying it's not going to feel anything, it's not going to mind. They're saying that makes sense to me. Like, I don't find that appalling. I don't find that behavior appalling if your mind is at a place where that's what you believe. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah.
Unless they're betraying their own convictions, they're not being bad, is what I'm saying.
Because they hold those beliefs.
Because they believe that a fetus, it doesn't have feelings. They believe that a fetus is a useless mass of tissue. For them to claim that is the case is not a bad thing to do, because that's all they know.
Yeah, I don't think because they believe it makes it right.
Well, I
think you've already made the point.
I mean, you're right. But they need to be they're not being subversive, is what I want to say. They're not intentionally being misleading. They're genuinely being misleading.
Yeah, to me, just speaking to the page alone, to me that seems disingenuous, deceitful. If
it's only deceitful if they know they're deceiving, is what I'm saying.
So they're just ignorant.
Yes,
yeah,
that's exactly what I'm saying.
Perhaps, I don't think ignorance is a pass, right? I think
it can be. I think in this case it is. I think it is.
I would say, not to trivialize this, right, but it's no different in some sense to I'm speeding, right, and a cop pulls you over and says, I don't know the speed limit, and he says, it's the law. You should have known. And especially in this industry.
Well,
how do you not...
Sure, but we don't have a law here, though, is the problem. There's no law. There's no law against how you can talk to a person when they're getting an abortion. Is there? Is there a script? Is there a law?
Yeah, I don't know if there is. There's laws for a lot of other things similar to that, whether it be transgender. Or,
I can't imagine there's a law for what you can and can't say during an abortion procedure. It won't feel a thing.
Yeah,
is that against the law to say it won't feel a thing? They don't know it won't feel a thing. They don't know that. They're just saying that. But is that a law thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd almost have to take it case by case. But I think when you think back to Roe versus Wade, in terms of what we knew at that time and what we know today, I mean, the advances in technology. I mean, today, if you walk into a crisis pregnancy center, many of them, in particular the one that we support, they have nurse practitioners and they have ultrasound equipment.
Okay.
Right there, they can say, "Hey, let us show you your baby."
Okay.
And they'll show you your baby.
Yep.
Today, we know it's a baby. We know through different procedures. My wife was telling me the other day that she saw a situation in which a baby a fetus needed an injection of some sort. And so they proceeded to do that. And when they did it, the baby reacted to it, right? It feels pain. From a very early age, it's developing organs. It seems like an easy pass to say that they just don't know.
You're right. I mean, like I said, to reiterate, just the idea that given enough time, it will become a human being. That would, to me, that makes it a human being at every point. Once it's a growing human being a fetus is just the first step to being a baby, and being a baby is the first step to being an adult. To say that, well, when it's a certain amount of days old, it's not really a life, I think it's really disingenuous to say. I mean, we have no way to make that determination. We don't have the right to make that decision for a life. It's just, you could say you don't think it matters, and that could be your position. But to say that it isn't a life, you don't really have the authority to make that distinction. It's a potential life, and that's kind of good enough in a lot of ways to be a life. And let me segue this into this idea that I've had since I was in middle school, actually, of what is universal truth and what that means. Now, universal truth usually is a religious thing, where the word of the being is the truth, right? Like God is the universal truth, and He decides what is right and wrong in all cases, and that is what's right and wrong. Period. But even from a perspective of not believing in God, okay, I'm an atheist. I always believed in this, because here's how I came to this conclusion with my mind. I feel the universe is finite. Okay? I don't believe in infinity. I think that's not really a thing. So there's a universe that's finite. And then as humanity, eventually we have two. This is my philosophy from middle school. I've honed it from then, but it still applies. As humanity, as a race, as a species, we have two options, given infinite time. So time will never end. We'll have infinite time to do everything we want to do. We'll either destroy ourselves, we will destroy ourselves, or we will learn everything there is to know in the finite universe. Those are the only two options, given infinite time. So at the end of time, human beings will still be there, knowing everything there is to know, or we will cease to exist because we destroy ourselves. Those are the only two possibilities. Unless you can introduce a third possibility, those are the only two available to my mind. Once we get to the end of time, where we know everything, we've transcended to be godlike beings, we know every single thing, there's no such thing as an opinion anymore. Everything's a fact, because we know everything about everything. That is universal truth. Once we know all knowledge, once we have everything possible, we know the answer to every question just inherently. We know the answer to that. But if that's the case, then the answers we have at that point are the correct answers. They're correct. And every opinion we have right now is not an opinion at all. It's either a right or a wrong answer. And we'll figure it out eventually, but right now we're too stupid to know. But everything has an answer. There's no opinions possible. And I believe in that. I believe that. So at the case of abortion, well, we're fucking fumbling around. Well, when does life start? We'll figure out when life starts. Once we figure everything out, we'll know exactly when life starts. We'll know exactly when an abortion could be like compassionate in the fact that life hasn't started yet. So like maybe a sperm is the start of life. Maybe like once we know everything, we'll know. We tell the future. We go, okay, of the 50 million sperm a man ejaculates, this one is the one that gives life to the egg. If we stop this one sperm, life will never happen. And then we know that as a fact. That's how abortions are like the correct way to do it. Maybe we'll learn that once we know on everything. But I do believe in that. Of all the time I've spent thinking about it, I still think that's true. The universal truth is a thing that we'll eventually get to unless we destroy ourselves. And once we get there, we'll know the answer to every question, and we'll have no opinions anymore. We'll just be all-knowing. So every opinion you have right now, is up for interpretation. And it's like until you have anything that's like unknown at this point, will be known at one point. And you will either be right or wrong. And that's kind of where, that's what I believe in right now. And it makes sense to me, that eventually we'll know everything. And we'll go, okay, well, what government's best? We'll just know that. Well, obviously, socialism is best. Maybe that's the case. Maybe we don't understand what's best yet. Maybe we haven't figured out the government form that's best to like manage a lot of people. But eventually we will know that. So I kind of believe in that. And I think that abortion, falls right into that. Because right now we're having a discussion. There's no pro-choice people aren't for killing human lives. They're definitely not for that. You know what I mean? They just decided arbitrarily that something is not a life yet. But they're, I would say they're wrong about that. I would say they don't have the authority to make that decision. And because they don't know, and this applies also to me. When I first became vegetarian, I wouldn't say vegetarian. I was pescatarian, which means I eat fish still. This is, I'm embarrassed. I'm straight up embarrassed by my view. I was pescatarian for about a year, and I'm embarrassed at myself for being that way because it's so irrational that now when I think back, how stupid am I? Where I decided that, fish are kind of like stupid. They're dumber than dogs. They're dumber than mammals. They probably don't feel pain in the same way that like animals feel pain. That's what I decided. I decided that for no reason at all. I just made the distinction in my fucking head. I just decided, fish, I'm not so sure about fish, so I'm going to eat them until I know better. I mean, what right did I have to decide that fish don't feel pain and don't want to die? And because I don't know for sure they feel pain and don't want to die, then I can eat them. I didn't know the answer to the question, but I decided to lean on the side of I'll just eat fish until I know better. I'll torture and murder fish until I know for a fact that they can feel pain and don't want to die. That's what I decided as a person. I'm embarrassed about my fucking views there. That's an embarrassing philosophy to take. That abortion, the same thing. I'm going to assume that fetuses don't feel pain and don't want to live until I know better somehow. Until some kind of science comes out that tells me that fetuses do feel pain. And that's ridiculous. If there's a question there that they might feel pain and not want to die versus they don't know or know, I should err on the side of caution and go, they probably do. And I shouldn't make the decision to go, I'm going to fucking kill fish and eat them or kill babies and not give a shit. I don't know for a fact, so I should, So now that's kind of how I feel about abortions. The same way I feel about fish. If I don't know for a fact that fish don't feel pain and don't care about being dead, then I shouldn't be eating them until I learn that they really don't care. And they say, kill me and eat me. I don't give a shit. Well, then I can eat them. But I haven't had that green flag yet, so I'm not going to eat them anymore. And I'm not going to abort babies anymore. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Not that I've ever aborted a baby, but I'm just saying that as a metaphorical piece. So that's where I'm at.
So you said a lot of things.
I said a lot of things.
I think, so you have me on here to present a conservative Christian perspective, right?
That's right, I do.
Partly.
That's why you're here.
I'll say one thing that I think is somewhat analogous or relates to what you're saying is, in the Bible, there's a letter of Romans, I mentioned it earlier, written by Paul. And in Romans chapters 1 and 2, he basically makes the case that the Jewish people, they had the law. So to summarize it, you might say it's the Ten Commandments, or even better, it's what I described, what Jesus said, right? In terms of the two commandments, everything hinges on those. So basically, the Jews had commandments from God on how to live in relation to themselves, in relation to God, right? So Paul makes the point that the Jews knew this, and they didn't live in accordance to it. Then he says there are those who are not Jews, right? They don't have the law, they don't have these commandments, but they have their conscience, right? Each individual person has a conscience, and they decide within that conscience what's right and what's wrong. And he makes the point that basically, even those who don't have the law, who don't have the commandments, they have their conscience, and they don't even adhere to that. They know right, they know wrong, and so often they pursue what's wrong. So the reason I say all this to say, I think there is universal truth. I think there is absolute truth. Of course, I believe it's found in Scripture.
For sure, you believe
right?
that, yeah.
But I believe what you're saying, even if there was a time in which we would know all truth, we would know right from wrong, we would know whatever. I guess what I would argue from a biblical perspective is that ultimately it wouldn't matter, because people would still choose to do what's in their own self-interest. And I think that's what we see in the case of, let's just talk about abortion since we're kind of in that context. I would say there are people who know it's wrong.
There are people like that, yeah.
If nothing more than just their conscience. I'm not saying based on any kind of religious doctrine, whatever, just their conscience. They know that terminating this pregnancy is wrong, and yet they go through it for whatever reasons. And again, I don't mean to make light of it. I sympathize with those who find themselves in that situation. But even just the knowledge doesn't mean people will adhere to it.
No, you're right. I mean, that would be an evil person, I would say.
Well,
that would be like it. You're doing a bad, like people who kill people, they know it's wrong to kill people. They kill people anyway. And that's just, I mean, you're doing something that's wrong. And there will always have those, as long as we have free will. We'll have people that do the wrong thing for selfish reasons, for sure. You know, that doesn't oppose knowing what's right, you know?
Right.
But I agree with you totally. People, you know, make that decision all the time. And those are people who are, you know, who are animal lovers, in my perspective, who love animals and, like, want to take care of them and say, well, I think pigs should be slaughtered humanely because I still want to eat bacon. How about you don't eat bacon anymore? And then no pigs are ever slaughtered, period, for you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, no, I still want to eat bacon, though. So I'd rather just make this really fucking pathetic stance that pigs should be slaughtered humanely. It's a joke. You know, the joke is, I want what's best for me, and I don't give a fuck what happens otherwise. And that's what abortion is like, you know, in a lot of ways. Unless the mother's life is at risk, then we can have a conversation. You know, if the mother's going to die, then we can have a conversation where, okay, whose life's more important? And that's what we're talking about, you know. But if it's like, well, I don't want to, you know, pay for a baby, well, that's just not a good enough reason for me to take a life, you know. Because then it's like justify taking a life in any other way, you know. All the only difference between like me, like let's say you're my debt collector and I want to kill you, so I don't like let's say I owe you $10,000, but instead of paying you, I'll just kill you because it's inconvenient for me to pay you the money. I'll just kill you, and then the debt will disappear. That's the same concept. The only difference is in one case you made an arbitrary decision that this fetus isn't alive. I just decided that. You know, or I invoked a medical journal that says a fetus doesn't have cognitive understanding until 8 months or whatever the fuck it is. But it's all nonsense. We don't know anything for a fact at all about that. You know, the only thing we could do is go, it's probably going to be a human being, so we shouldn't be killing it. You know, and that's kind of where it's at. This is a serious issue for my wife and me. She is very pro-choice, and she's very mad at me for changing my views.
Really?
She's very upset with me. She threatened to leave me about it, actually. She has. But I mean, I can't be a rational person and not, you know, follow what I understand to be true. I can't just decide that it's okay in this case, but not this case. It's not logical. And I want to be a logical person. It's important to me. You know, I can't just fucking make arbitrary rules for myself. That's bullshit. So, I mean, that's the way it is, you know? I mean, that's me, and I'm proud of myself for that. That I can change my views completely on new evidence. If new evidence shows itself, I'm not gonna you can convince me of anything if you make a good enough case. I'm absolutely logical. I strive for that. So please argue with me. That's why I have this podcast. That's why I say ridiculous shit all the time. You know, that's what I'm about. So I essentially changed my views. You know, and I have veganism to thank. And, you know, if you're like, well, I'm afraid that'll happen to me. Don't, you have to be logical all the time. That's all we have as human beings. We can make rational choices. That's what makes us special. My dog will never make a rational choice. He'll only do what's best for him and what he likes. He doesn't have that fucking capability. We do. That's what makes human beings special. Is we have the ability to make rational choices. So we need to be rational whenever possible. That's what I think is important. That's what'll lead us to the best possible outcome of knowing everything versus killing ourselves, which we're on that fucking track right now. You know what I find interesting too? That right now, I mean, the movie Armageddon is a good example of if a comet comes to kill Earth and we send Aerosmith to go, you know, save us and they fail, we will die just like every other species on the planet. Like, we like to think that we're so great because we invented microphones and fucking laptops and coffee and brandy. We're so fucking great. What's the last thing cow ever did? Has he ever made a painting? No, a cow's never made a painting. We're better than cows. But if a fucking meteor comes and destroys the planet, we're all the same amount of dead. Except for cockroaches and rats. Probably will be fine. So who's really better? You know what I mean? Are we better than cockroaches and rats? If a comet comes and fucking ends our pathetic existence, they're still here and we're not? Are we better than them then? Like, what is better? We decide what's better because we reign over the planet. You know what I mean? We made it. But if the fucking really Armageddon comes, We're not better than any other species that exists here. Are we? Are we not on equal footing when a fucking comet hits us? We're fucked, man. We're fucked like the rest of them. So I think the whole idea that we're superior is kind of like highly suspect. Because to a dog, like the fact that we have cars, he couldn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? Like, I eat my food and I sleep. What do I care about your car and your fucking video games? I don't give a shit. And he's right. It doesn't matter, you know? I just think it's interesting to know that, like, I mean, maybe we'll get to a point where a comet won't kill us, but right now, if a comet came tomorrow, we're fucked. And cockroaches aren't. So who's really better? Is it us or is it cockroaches? Because we make art? We make fucking the Mona Lisa? So we're superior? A fucking comet doesn't give a shit about the Mona Lisa. We're fucked. So think about that for a little bit when you're thinking, well, we're better than pigs, so we can eat them. Are you better? Sometimes I wish for a comet, man. I wish.
It's kind of a dark view of life, isn't it?
I wish a comet would come and clean us up. I think humans are disgusting. I hate them. I hate human beings.
Well, again, like I said earlier, right? We all tend to agree that we're sort of in a mess, to say it lightly, but we all disagree about how we got here and how we get out of it, right?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So, this is a part of our show where we go to picks. Do you have any picks?
What do you mean by pick?
Well, what I mean by pick is things you like to do, things that you've discovered recently, like a new movie that's really awesome, a new game, a new, whatever. We talk about the last part of our segment is kind of picks. It's called picks. I don't know if you have anything. Maybe I didn't tell you about picks. I probably didn't.
Why don't you go first?
I will go first. So I don't know if I covered it last episode because I feel like we went kind of long last episode and I didn't say my pick. But there's a video game called Master of Orion, which I'm a huge fan of. Master of Orion 2. It's a DOS game. You can download it on goodoldgames.com. And it's a game where you make a race of people or, beings, like an alien race, and you can do whatever you want. And then you build, it's like Civilization. You play Civilization, the game. It's a lot like that, but it's in the universe. It's a galactic framework. And you can do a lot of stuff, and it's an old game, and I play it to this day because it's so good. There's a remake in the works. They're remaking it, like with new graphics, new everything, new production. I'm super excited. I love playing. I'm playing the game in anticipation of the remake. I'm playing the game right now, and I'm loving it. And it's just, I'm really excited. I'll put links in the website. You can check them out. And if you like Civilization, Master of Orion, let me know. And tell me how you like it. Tell me how you played it. I love to hear about it. Let's talk about it. The other thing is an iOS game called Horizon Chase. And it's like a racing game where you're like a car. And it mimics the 80s arcade racing games like Cruisin' USA. I can't remember any other ones. But it's like a really simplistic left-right gas and brake racing game where you're like a cool car and it's a low polygon count, really bright colors. It's like $1.99. There's no free-to-play elements. There's no like giving 99 cents for gold, nothing like that. You buy the game once and you play it forever, so people love that. I've been enjoying the game a lot. It's really fun. You got anything?
So I'm gonna go. Have you heard of Last Ship?
Last Ship? Never.
Okay, so my wife and I, we don't watch a whole lot of TV shows, but we do watch The Last Ship. So it's kind of this. I think it's on TNT.
Okay.
And it's a story of a disease that I'm gonna try not to spoil this as well while describing it. But it's a story of a disease that is spreading across the world. The United States government sends out this ship, the Last Ship, in hopes that they'll find a cure. Okay. So
where's the ship going?
Well, the ship went to. I don't want to spoil it, but it went out to try to find the cure, and that all happened in season 1. And I think my wife, when we started watching it, we said, "How can you make multiple seasons about a disease that spreads around the globe?" And again, I'm trying not to spoil it, but I'll just say the cure is found in season 1.
Oh, okay.
And we thought, how in the world could you continue season after season on this premise that there's a disease around the world? The Navy needs to go out and find the cure. They find the cure in season 1. But without spoiling, I'll say it's been really, really good.
The Ship.
The Last Ship on TNT.
Interesting. Can I see it on Amazon or
yeah, so we purchased it through Apple, but you can watch it for free on TNT.
Can I watch it on Netflix or Amazon?
Amazon possibly.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll try. The Last Ship, huh?
Yeah, The Last Ship has been really, really good.
Cool series. That sounds interesting, yeah. Okay, that's cool. Anything else?
Well, I told you, I think my time is pretty busy right now. I just started Biblical Greek.
Biblical Greek. Is that a pick for you? Should we recommend my user?
I'm not sure I'm going to recommend Biblical Greek, but I'll tell you it's going to take up all your time. So
wow, okay.
When you have 2 kids.
Yeah, you're a busy guy. You got kids.
Seminary.
You got all kinds of kids, man.
Work.
Tell us about
your kids.
You're a prepositionalist. Presuppositionalist.
Oh, a presuppositionalist.
Presuppositionalist. That's a word. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, basically it just says that we all come to different points of argument with presuppositions, right? So my presupposition is that Scripture is the very Word of God. It's infallible. It's without contradiction. And so when we discuss matters of life, I begin with Scripture, and that's where I start. And for you, perhaps, your presuppositions are that God doesn't exist, people are inherently bad. Maybe they're bad. Let's just say they're bad.
We're bad. They're bad.
Right?
They're pieces of shit.
We're bad. And it's just an acceptance of where you're coming from and where I'm coming from. Oh. So tonight when we discussed veganism, vegetarianism, we discussed abortion, universal truths. All of my positions are from Scripture because I'm a presuppositionalist. But you're a presuppositionalist as well, right? So you don't believe that God exists.
Sure.
And so anything that may seem to come up against that may seem to contradict that, you're quick to probably cast it aside because you don't believe God exists. It's an impossibility.
Yeah, I mean, if God said something is true, that to me doesn't mean anything. So
sure,
yeah, I'll cast that aside. Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's important to, when we were talking, I made that point just to say, you've never asked me, right, to put aside my beliefs, my values.
How could I? Right? It'd be pointless.
Well, a lot of people do.
Yeah, it'd be pointless for me to do that.
So in the arena of dialogue, debate, people often will say, well, that's your religious belief.
And you say, yes, that's true.
I say, yeah, you're right. And that's what presuppositionalist is.
A presuppositionalist.
Yeah, I mean, it's not...
So, I mean, I guess, are we all presuppositionalists?
Yes.
We are all that.
Yeah,
so what does a distinction mean? That if you call yourself that, what does that mean?
I think it's
nothing.
It's to define our presuppositions, to be upfront about our presuppositions.
So you know you're just coming up front that I believe in the Word of God, and that's it.
And that's where I'm going to begin when we have a conversation.
Interesting.
So again, I think for you and I, as we have this dialogue, it's a non-issue, but for many, it is an issue. Because people will say, well, I don't have access to that, right? Or I don't believe that, and so we can't discuss it.
Why is that an issue for us?
You've not asked me to set it aside.
Well, yeah, I mean, that'd be pointless, right? Because that's what you believe. That'd be dumb to do.
Right.
Interesting. What was I just going to say to you just now?
I don't know.
Oh, that's really too bad. I feel like I had something to say.
Children, family, classic Greek.
God. Darn it. I had something to say, but I didn't. I just want to say again, I really appreciate you not ordering meat that one time we had dinner together. I really appreciated that, and I didn't appreciate it enough when it happened. It didn't come until later that I really like. You know what? I've had lunch a ton of times with my friends, Yuri and Adam and Eric, all those times, and they know how passionate I am. And we off the podcast, we've had very heated conversations. Me and Malone had a straight up fight about it. About how he's wrong for being eating meat, and they never would just not order a meat product when they went out to dinner with me. And I don't want to be offended by that, but you're the only one that actually cared enough to make a choice there. With them, it was never even they never even thought about it. They're like, I'm going to order what I always order. But you actually did give it thought, and that really means a lot to me. It really does. And I was going to make you make that choice you made one of my picks last podcast, but I ran out of time. But I told my wife about it, and she's like, yeah, you should make that one of your picks. That was really great of you to do that. It was.
Well, again, I think it's love for neighbor.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear. I think we talked about before not being a stumbling block to someone else, right? Not doing something that's objectionable to their conscience.
And that's good that you're saying that, and you're doing it in a way where you're going to not order meat to be not a stumbling block for me, rather than condemning me for getting in your case about why you should not eat meat. You're taking kind of the high road almost. Because I am in your face about it. And I'm saying, Pitts, you should come to the conclusion that's correct, and you're not, even though I'm doing that to you, you're still taking the high road and saying, well, I'm going to like go ahead and go with him there. And that's so great of you to do that. And that makes me think very highly of you. And everyone who listens, who has a vegan friend, and it's a growing group of vegans. If you have a vegan friend and you're going out to dinner with them, just try a vegan meal that time. Maybe that's a great excuse for you, to try something vegan and see is it really that horrible? Do you really feel so unfulfilled during your dinner if you don't have a meat on there? And a lot of that, this is a topic I want to talk about, but I didn't. But maybe I'll bring it up right now. There's an article that I'll post about how the USDA and the FDA are working together to shoot down this company who makes alternative egg products. And the USDA and FDA are like, they're in cahoots, essentially. They're in cahoots with the cattle farming and the dairy industry. They're completely in their pockets. And there's a company that came out that makes alternative egg products, and they're trying to shut them down. They're trying to keep them from going on market. They're trying to ban them from Whole Foods. They're forcing them to change the name of fake mayonnaise to, a different name. They can't use the word mayonnaise, even though they're an alternative mayonnaise. The whole thing is corrupt. It's a whole thing is dirty. And everything is wrong about what is and isn't healthy. And everything you learn in high school or middle school about what the food pyramid is and the food plate, whatever the fucking age you are, that's all bullshit because it's all bought. And who buys it? The dairy and fucking cattle industry. That's who buys all that shit. So everything you know about your nutrition that you learn from school is corrupt and dirty. You need to do your real research about what is healthy, because it's not what you think it is. It's not true. It's just straight up not.
Well, I think ultimately it says a lot about government determining what's right and what's wrong, intervening in the lives of people, right?
I fucking hate the government dealing with my shit. Fuck them, man. You know what I'm talking about. Me and you were conservatives together about keeping the government out of our fucking business.
You define yourself as a libertarian, right?
Absolutely. Although I've had a lot of flack from real libertarians who have been really mad at me about not being libertarian enough, being a tyrant. But yes, I identify myself as a libertarian, absolutely.
So I don't want to get us off topic necessarily, and I don't know if we have time.
There's no topic. You go ahead, go do whatever you want.
Do we want to talk about the Kentucky clerk at all?
Let's talk about it. Fuck it.
Because it's somewhat in relation to
let's talk about
government intervention, conscience.
Let's talk about
We're talking about all those things recently.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how closely you've been following. I mean,
give us a summary of the story. You do it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's a clerk in Kentucky.
Somebody
Davis.
County clerk. Something Davis.
Yeah, unfortunately, I forget her name.
Davis.
I think her mom was the clerk for 40 years.
Wow.
She stepped down or retired or whatever. And then this individual was voted in as the clerk, right? And this is all prior to the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage.
Prior to that.
She got elected prior to that, right? So now we have the same-sex marriage ruling. She is, the law's the law of the land. She has to issue licenses to same-sex couples, right?
Okay.
So she has said that I'm not going to issue licenses to either same-sex couples or heterosexual couples. I'm just not issuing any licenses.
That's what she said?
That's what she has done.
That's not what I understood from it.
No, that's what she did, because she said, I'm not going to make a case of discrimination here. I'm just not going to issue licenses.
She's straight up not going to do licenses, period.
Right.
Okay.
That's my understanding of the story. She's not issuing any licenses.
All right.
So at this point, I think maybe even yesterday or the day before, she was actually brought before a judge, found in contempt, and put in jail. So she is, as far as I understand, she is in jail right now for not issuing licenses as part of her job.
Period.
Yeah, she's not issuing licenses.
Not even to heterosexual couples.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's where we find ourselves, and I think it's a really interesting topic for obviously.
Well, I know that at all, actually.
Well, here's my thing.
You know what? I got to pee so much.
You want to take a break?
I got to do it. Well, it bothers pee.
Hopefully you edit this, right?
I'll edit it.
So yeah, I looked it up. Her name is Kim Davis.
Kim Davis. I knew that was her name.
So she's not issuing. I mean, she's in jail now, but she wasn't issuing any licenses. Right? She's not discriminating.
So she wasn't discriminating. She was just not licensing anything equally.
Correct.
Not hetero couples either.
Right.
Are there any videos of her not doing hetero couples?
No, I'm not aware of hetero. There was a homosexual couple who came
Absolutely there was, yeah.
and did this.
That's what that video I saw was her denying that couple, but she denied every marriage.
Right.
What was her stance? Because it was wrong, she would not do marriage at all.
It's against her religious beliefs. It's against her conscience.
To do what? To do gay marriage. To do gay marriage.
To sign off on the marriage license
of gay people.
Yes.
So she would, but to not discriminate, she would just not do any marriage. Well, okay, that's different than what I heard actually.
So I guess why it's interesting. It's interesting for a lot of reasons, right? But I think it shouldn't be absent. We can disagree on same-sex marriage, right? But I don't think it should be lost on us that a person is in jail today for not doing something that goes against her conscience. It's nothing more than that. And, as I reflected on this, I mean, I think we underestimate what our founding fathers attempted to do with this nation, right? Especially as it relates to the First Amendment, an establishment of religion, but the free expression of your own religion and faith, and to not come into conflict. And in the Christian circle, there's been a lot of conversation on, well, should she just issue them? Should she resign? But she's an elected official, right? So they can't fire her because she's elected. So she should just step down. She should just issue them. But I actually think, and maybe as you think about this, you'll have a different response. But so one thing I'm trying to do is I'm pursuing military chaplaincy. And in the military, there is this concept for chaplains of perform or provide. Okay. So imagine I'm in the military. I'm a chaplain. And a same-sex couple comes to me and they want me to perform a wedding. Okay. And I say, based on my beliefs, I cannot perform that because it's against my conscience and my beliefs. However, so that's the perform piece. The provide piece is I need to point you then in a direction in which you can still exercise your faith, or in this example, to be married to your partner. And I think that's pretty analogous to what's happening here, and it probably would have been a pretty good solution. Because my understanding is there are offices in the area, maybe a 20, 30-minute drive, where any individual, whether heterosexual or homosexual, can go and get a marriage license. But in this situation, I don't think it's not a matter of a license, right? They could have gone elsewhere within the state of Kentucky, not an inconvenience, and have gotten a license.
I don't know.
They could have.
Well, it's a government office that issues marriage licenses, right?
Absolutely, the license or the facility that she's in.
So you're suggesting to go to a different?
I'm suggesting that what I've described as a military chaplain with a concept of perform or provide provides a framework that could have worked in this situation. But couples sued her for not issuing the license, and so doing something that's objectionable to her conscience, and now she is in jail today. Look, I mean, it is the law of the land, and it is a difficult balance, as I said, from the very beginning of what we try to accomplish every day in society, of enabling people to exercise freedom of speech, freedom of religion, without establishing religion. So I think here would have been a very viable solution. And for whatever, I don't know why they didn't pursue it. I don't know other circumstances around it. But I thought I should just bring it up because, again, one, it speaks to government, it speaks to conscience, intervention.
I didn't realize she abstained from all weddings. But, I mean, in my mind, it's just like, if you don't perform your federal requirements, then you just get fired from your job, and they hire somebody else to do what needs to be done. You know what I mean? Like, if it's a law to issue licenses and you refuse to do it, like if somebody at the DMV just decides he's not going to give licenses out, well, they get fired then, and then you get somebody else who will issue licenses.
Yeah, but the issue here is this is something that is objectionable to your conscience, right? And so I think it's dangerous. I just think it's too casual to say, well, anyone who opposes anything the government can't serve in the government. I don't think anyone wants that.
That's interesting what you're saying, because the easy draw would be to Nazi Germany, for example, where the government decides that Jews should be killed on sight, right? And then some government official decides, I'm not going to do that. Is he breaking the law? Should he be punished for not shooting the Jews when that's against his conscience? I mean, I think that what you're saying is very, logically very, comparable to that, in her mind. So yeah, that's interesting to think about for sure.
I just think it's a difficult topic.
It is. That is interesting.
And how we strike this balance.
Yeah.
And I've been just alarmed on both sides about how we have pursued this. While all the while there seems to be this example for us. Again, specifically, I'm thinking of just military chaplaincy with my background. But look it up. It's perform or provide. And it's a model that's been working for how knows how long. Where in which someone can either perform, but they can't just turn you down absolutely. Right? So again, I mentioned the same-sex marriage example. You could imagine a situation in which maybe someone who's a Muslim comes to me and says, I need a prayer mat. Right? Well, I don't have them, but I just don't turn them away because then I'm violating their First Amendment, their ability to express their faith. So then I have to provide in a way to say, hey, why don't you go check out chaplain so-and-so who is Muslim? So I just don't understand why that or something similar to that could have been pursued in this case. I think the other thing about this is, I think as I was reading back on this, back in 2004, the San Francisco mayor, so it was state law that marriage was defined between a man and a woman, right? That's law. But the San Francisco mayor required county clerks to issue same-sex marriage licenses. Now, were those clerks or that mayor put in jail? No. So it's a double standard, right? Again, I'm not saying it is the law, and I'm not denying that it is. But we have to find some reasonable accommodation for people of different faiths, of different values and ethics to be able to serve in those capacities. I don't think anyone on either side wants a government or wants a human resource policy that says you have to absolutely adhere to everything the government believes, or even in your position to be able to serve in that capacity.
What you're saying is totally right, and it's interesting to think of it in the context of what you believe is right or not, and like just because something is a state law, if it's opposed to what you believe, if you should do it or not. I think that's important to think about because that is how, that's very much how Nazis acted. And I'm not saying this is like what Nazis did. I'm not saying that. But conceptually it is, where we would say, well, the law is the law, and we should put somebody there who obeys the law. But what if somebody doesn't agree with the law? What if the law is wrong? And in the case of, killing Jews, that law we agree is wrong. But in the context of Nazi Germany, that law was right. That was the law. This isn't a fantasy. That's exactly what was going on. And, somebody could oppose that and not kill Jews, and in this case, that person their belief is as strong. And then people who who are pro gay marriage, and I am for gay marriage, they will say that, they're ignorant or whatever they may be, and you can say those words, but to that person who is being ignorant, they're not being ignorant. They're doing what they believe is right. And if we stifle that in the case of this, then what are we going to do about stifling that when it's like kill all black people, or kill all Mexicans or whatever it might be, something really ridiculous, but kill all Jews? That really happened in our world. That happened in the last 100 years. We were killing all Jews, and that was a decree from a government body that was absolutely sanctioned. That really fucking happened. And could that happen again? Absolutely could happen again. And if somebody wants to oppose that, and we set a precedent right now where we're gonna say you can't oppose a government decree ever. I mean, that's pretty dangerous. And I didn't think of it that way at all until you just brought it up, and that's definitely true.
Well, it's been a hot topic. It's been covered for.
I had no idea that she. It makes it better for me. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it enough yet. But the way I saw the video is she just declined one gay couple. You know what I mean? But if you're saying she declined doing her job, period, I think that's a much more powerful statement.
Well, if I read it correctly, there was a homosexual couple and a heterosexual couple who both brought a lawsuit against her.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because both were denied their right to be married.
But I'm happy that she wasn't discriminating. She was not doing her job at all. She was like protesting. It was more of a protest.
Yeah, absolutely.
She
went to jail for it, right?
Yeah. But I mean, she was doing it because she didn't agree with gay people getting married.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was her reason.
Yeah.
So what would you say is you're opposed to gay marriage?
Correct.
You are opposed to it because the Bible says so. So what's your stance on this then? What is your thing here?
This specific example or more broadly?
What should be done about it?
this specific situation.
Yeah.
I think what I described before in the sort of the analogous example of military chaplaincy seems somewhat relevant. I thought, what would be an objection to that? And I could see someone saying, well, as a military chaplain, you're a minister. But then how do you define a minister? I would say, what, you have to be an official religious officiant or minister in order to hold to certain beliefs or values, right? A minister has more legitimate beliefs than someone. No, I disagree with that. I think it's a good example. My understanding is, and I can go back and look, but my understanding is that it's not the only county in Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of counties to my knowledge.
Tons of counties, probably.
And what I would say is if for some reason the state of Kentucky did not have a county where they were being offered, yeah, they would have to provide the means by which a same-sex couple could get married.
What should Kim do in this case as her job? Does she do the right thing?
Like I said, there's been a lot of debate. Even I've been reading a lot of material within the Christian circle about what she should do.
She should step down. That's what I would say she should do.
Yeah, and so that I don't know if we want a government that says if you morally opposed to some aspect of our government, you can't serve in the government.
Well, I mean, I think that's what it should be. That's what it should be. Especially if we have a democracy where people can't always agree, where the majority gets to vote and the minority is, outcast. That's kind of where we're at. That's a majority rule kind of mentality. If you are in the minority and you feel morally opposed to doing what you're supposed to do, you should step down. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
So let me put it maybe another way. So let's assume she steps down.
Yeah.
And goes and becomes a baker or a florist.
Sure.
Do you know where I'm going with this, right?
She's going to do the same thing when she's a florist?
Yeah, and then, I know there was a case in Oregon where a couple was fined like $150,000 for emotional, I don't know what you call it. So where do people, where do we go?
That's a different, I feel like, I don't know what to say about that. That's different.
It should. You would say I think it should be different, but I'm saying it's not.
Well, it's different
because
because
business is being held.
The majority of if the state passed a law that says this is okay, then it's a government thing where that needs to be followed through. If a florist personally wants to make discrimination, whatever, then that's a different issue. So if she wants to become a florist and then discriminate there, then that's a different issue. And maybe that's something we need to deal with separately. But from the point of the state in Kentucky, it's legal to gay marry, then the state needs to facilitate that. And if she refuses to do her job in that capacity, she must step down, right? To me, that's the only rational thing to do. What is the rational thing to do for you, in your mind? What should she do as a person who is in a position where she must do something she's opposed to? What should she do?
Yeah, I don't know if I can tell her what. I guess
step down.
I think it's such a dangerous precedent.
Or keep her post and refuse and then be a martyr. You know what I mean? That's the alternative. That's what she chose to do.
Yeah, it is what she chose to do.
That's what she chose to do.
I think, again, I think the state of Kentucky should provide means outside of her.
Yeah.
To provide these licenses. And if the people don't approve of how she did her job, they can vote her out the next time she comes up for re-election.
That's it. That makes sense.
But my thing with the florist and the baker is that we've seen a number of examples in which individuals who are opposed to, again, people who think that if I bake a cake in that situation, I'm supporting same-sex marriage, whatever. They've been sued. They've been closed down. I guess my point is that even in the private sector, it's not a place in which you can go and follow your conscience. It seems not. I know there's a couple examples, but one specifically you can easily go look. It's in the state of Oregon. A bakery was fined. It was like $150,000 and required to bake a cake for this wedding. And I'm not even so much debate. I don't want to necessarily, and we can. I'm not so much debating same-sex marriage and its validity or not.
Yeah,
I get it. It's the law of the land. I get it.
I understand what you're saying.
But here we have someone who was in this position prior to the ruling, and her conscience is opposed to it.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, and like I said, the law of the land is not always the correct, and now we can look back on Nazi Germany and determine that the law of the land during Hitler's reign was incorrect. But if during Hitler's reign, if you went on the street and just shot a Jew, no problem. You know what I mean? Like it's a fucked up thing. So, I mean, there definitely are examples in our recent history where the law of the land has been immoral. You know, nowadays we look back, but at the time of it happening, that was the way it was. You know, so nowadays, I'm not saying, you know, I'm for gay marriage.
Yeah, right.
But what you're saying on a conceptual level, where if somebody is morally opposed to doing something and they're punished for that, and their concerns aren't taken seriously, and you know the recourse says, well, the law of the land says this is the way it is, and everybody who disagrees is wrong, that is definitely dangerous. Absolutely it is. And we should think about that, you know, and how that is punished and how that's handled. It's interesting to think about, for sure.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, that would be my appeal to everyone, is to let's seriously consider this. It's not something just to take flippantly.
Yeah.
Whether it's right. No, just don't do it, or you should be fired and put in jail, or whatever, right? All of us should appreciate, again, what our founding fathers attempted to do and what we have continued to perpetuate in this delicate balance, right? It is delicate. But again, it's just as I reflected on it and I thought about specifically military chaplaincy and how they do strike that balance, I thought it was somewhat analogous to this situation.
That's really good of them. I like that philosophy there. Yeah, it's good. All right, well, you know what? Thanks, Chris, for coming to our podcast, for coming on. Look out for comments on the YouTube channel. I'll make sure to give you a link to that. Chris' first time, so he's not familiar. I'll make sure you can respond to people who are criticizing, whatever they might be. Thanks for listening. Of course, maybe we'll have Chris on sometime again. Let us know what you think about him, and we will either have him on
or not.
I don't know. Whatever. We'll see what happens. So yeah, you know, I know Chris a long time. We're good friends. You know, we disagree on a lot of things on a fundamental level, but we get along anyway. It happens because, you know, we're logical people and we can think through things. We don't fight about it. We can disagree, but we don't have to be we don't have to fucking battle. You know what I mean? We could live our lives. It's fine. We're both good dudes. So yeah, I think that's cool. So thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter. You care? Twitter? Do you give a shit? You don't give a fuck.
No.
He doesn't care. Follow me on Twitter. Lex Krasny. You know the rules. Thanks for listening.